Hi, everybody. My name is Kevin Dubuque. I'm a Senior Product Marketing Manager here at Definitive Healthcare. Prior to coming to Definitive, recently I spent the last 4 to 5 years at Cardinal Health working on a variety of their medical supplies businesses. So really excited to be with you today, talk about what I think is a very important topic within the industry right now. And with me today is Katie Sakovitz, our Senior Customer Success Manager. Katie, you want to introduce yourself, give a little background?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Kevin. Hi, everyone. Like Kevin said, my name is Katie Sakovitz, Senior Customer Success Manager here at Definitive Healthcare. I have been with Definitive Healthcare for about 3.5 years, worked with a variety of types of clients, but most recently worked with a lot of medical supply companies. So excited to walk you all through portions of the product today.
So with that, let's kick into it here. So the agenda today consists of sort of 3 main things. I'm going to talk through the last 18 months or so of what's been happening, not only within the global supply chain, but also very specifically the supply chain dedicated to medical supplies and supplying into the healthcare ecosystem. We're going to talk a little bit about what's happening very specifically right now and how we think that's going to impact over the next 6 to 12 months. Talk a little bit about some very specific challenges around medical supplies companies and what many of you are facing as you try to navigate the waters that is the pandemic at this particular moment. And then finally, Katie's going to come back and she's going to give us a number of examples of how the healthcare commercial intelligence that is surfaced from the data platform that is Definitive Healthcare can help you better forecast not only your sales, but also your production planning as we head into the next 12 to 18 months. So with that, let's get into it. If you're like me and you've spent any period of time in the last number of months trying to fully understand your industry and those that are impacted by the things that are going on in the world, you will no doubt read some of the headlines that I put on the screen here. I selected just a handful that I thought were particularly sort of I want to say outlandish, but really grabbed the reader's attention. And again, we often know that the headlines can be either misleading or maybe not tell the exact story. But I think what we'll figure today is once we get through the entirety of the data and some of the stories that I have for you, you're going to see that the headlines are not exaggerated in any way. And we've got some serious challenges ahead of us in this particular industry going forward. So let's talk about how we got here. We'll talk about a little bit of a history lesson. We'll kind of go back 18 months and kind of get a sense of what happened, right? So in the spring and summer of 2020, there were a number of things that happened obviously across the world as the cases in both the U.S. and abroad, it went up, right? We saw challenges with raw materials, challenges with labor as countries like China decided to, sort of lock down the majority of their population, especially in areas that had a significant number of the manufacturing operations for the global supply chain, especially around medical supplies. So we saw, we saw challenges there. What had happened was, and it was a very interesting timeline of everything. So China locks down early, the U.S. and others sort of delayed their, if you want to call it lockdowns or their COVID protocols until later on. So we had a scenario where, China locked down, we were going to go. China then decides that they're ready to sort of take on the production processes and the global supply chain in a more wholehearted way. And they were in a better spot at a certain point before we were, right? So there was a period of time where, they were shipping to us and we just didn't have any product left back to ship back to them. So it's kind of an interesting scenario where I would say at one point in the middle of the pandemic, out of every, 3 or 4 containers that were coming into the U.S. from China, we were sending back 3 of those containers empty because we just didn't have the facilities and the people capital necessary to sort of do the things that we needed to do from the U.S. perspective. Add to that this global shortage of containers, right? So it's interesting, we talked about before the sort of this natural trade imbalance between the U.S. and China right now, among other nations. But we had a scenario where there just wasn't enough containers in the U.S. So you had a scenario where just there weren't in the right places, right? So we need to get those containers where they need to be, and that obviously takes a long time. It takes a number of months to transport those containers back and forth across the sea. Add to that fact that in the early part, really the first half of 2020, we stopped manufacturing these containers globally, again, due to those same issues that you saw in the first bullet point there, raw material challenges and labor shortages. So you had sort of 2 factors pulling at the same time that really did not allow us the requisite storage space and capacity to have an effective global transport system. I'll touch on ships here just briefly because I want to talk about a little bit more later on, but I'm sure we all saw in the headlines in March when the Evergreen Corporation ship, the Evergrande, got stuck in the Suez Canal. And that was, I want to say, somewhere between 6 and 8 days. And in that time, that was disruptive to the global supply chain to the tune of about $12 billion a day, right? Just from those products not being able to get to where they need to go to. And ultimately, those ripple effects cascade, as many of us know who've been in the industry for a while. And then ultimately, when product did get to its end goal, especially here in the U.S., the folks that we rely on to do the yeoman's work of bringing that product to market, they were also handcuffed in a number of ways, whether it's through COVID protocols, illness, and even in some cases through the stimulus funds that were distributed at certain points, in both monetary and fiscal. So truly, what we can say is that every aspect of the global supply chain has been impacted in some way due to the pandemic. So I think the interesting thing is that we've seen what happened in the last 18 months, right? And that takes us to today. But what we're seeing though is that more challenges truly still remain. Let's get into those a little bit here. What I'm showing you here is claims data pulled from the definitive healthcare product around COVID-19. As you can see here, the most recent data we have is in August, and as Katie mentioned just a couple of minutes ago, we have. The data that we pull out of this particular product is updated monthly. So we don't have September yet, but we will have it in a short time here. But up until the August data, you're seeing 177% increase in the number of COVID claims in the U.S. And if you mirror that up with what the CDC is reporting, and it's showing, again, this is a little bit more recent data as we pulled it, maybe last week or so. Cases, continuing to drive demand into September. Hopefully now we're sort of on the tail end there. We're sort of backing down. But I think what we've seen with the Delta variant and others is that there have been multiple waves, right? So although it is coming down, we are still seeing volumes that are significantly higher than anything we've seen in the last 6 to 8 months. So still cause for concern, still things happening in the industry that we have to be cautious of. On the logistics front, what we'll see is that the ports, especially on the West Coast, are unable to keep up with all the demand that we're seeing. This particular graph here shows that the number of anchored container ships in the LA and the Long Beach ports. So this is saying that there are a number of almost 80, as of a couple of weeks ago, 80 ships hanging out in the water, waiting to be offloaded. And again, the rationale behind this is that, we, for a long period of time, especially during COVID, we couldn't do many of the things that we wanted to do, especially around travel, right? So we took much of the stimulus funds that were provided not only by the U.S. government, but other governments, both fiscal and monetary, and we spent that on goods, right? I'm sure I'm not the only one on this call who may have made it an addition or done some work around their house, bought something that they might have been holding off on, a car or whatever it is. So that those goods needed to come from somewhere. In many cases, we still pull a lot of our production from other countries, Asia, and specifically China. So that product is still coming in. So again, you saw a period of time where we didn't do much for 3, 6, 9 months. Stimulus funds start to come, we then spend that money. And if you were in a position of, you had a lead time of a product of say 6 to 12 weeks, what we're seeing now is that lead time can be extended anywhere from 4, 5, or even 6 months. You have a long lead time for any of those goods still trying to come into the country. And you can see here why. And I will just say, I've got something I'm going to show you next here that I think a picture is often worth 1,000 words, and many times often worth 1,000 graphs. So this picture here is from the Port of Los Angeles, not even 2 weeks ago. So you see here a number of ships. I'm not going to count them all for you. If you want to, you can have a little, play a little game with yourself and count them. But this is just in Los Angeles. So imagine the amount of goods just sitting in the harbor waiting to be offloaded and ultimately gotten to their final destination. Truly astonishing what's going on in the supply chain at this particular moment. So outside of just the containers themselves and where they're going, I think we look at other things like shipping rates, right? So we talked about the lack of containers a little bit earlier on. We talked about the number of goods that are trying to get in the country from this sort of bolus of demand that we had. And you see here, the shipping rates have gone parabolic. And it's interesting, I think from a lot of us, depending on what type of margins you're working with as an organization, this could be significantly impactful to you, right? Well, because previously you were paying $2,000 to $3,000 for a container to make its way around the globe, now you're paying somewhere between $12,000 and $14,000. So this makes, in my opinion anyway, you're going to need a significant look into what's actually happening in the future, and really being able to tie together, and very specifically, what things do we need, and how quickly do we need to get them to where they need to be, because we just don't have the flexibility here with costs this high to make mistakes anymore. So again, Delta, excuse me. So we'll just wrap up the things that have got us to this particular moment that are happening right now, right? Delta and other COVID-19 variants continue to spread across the globe. We're hopeful that the end of September and early October is a prerequisite of what's, hopefully sort of a move away from these, and we can get back to some sense of normalcy. But who knows, right? That's the thing we need to continue to plan for. So in total cases and hospitalizations continue to trend higher. Another thing that we didn't have a particular bullet point here on, but I think it's important to talk about, is providers themselves, right? I think a number of providers, whether that's at the IDN level or even at the GPO level, looking to provide value for either their membership or their particular, their particular facilities. And they say, well, we can't go through a period of time where we don't have product like this again. PPE is one thing. I think what we're seeing is not only are they trying to stockpile 6, 12, 18, even 24 months of PPE equipment for the future, but they're also trying to do other things like medical supplies. They cannot afford a scenario in the future where they don't have the necessary supplies and are trying to deal with things like this. So they're looking to build that excess inventory as well. And again, ports seeing that tremendous imbalance between so the inbound and outbound traffic, and obviously those freight costs, like we talked about, at a point now where you can no longer continue to ignore them. So what I think we're seeing here is that the strain is going to continue on in the future. Many of these supply chain experts that we sort of have read and things like that are predicting, at least at some point, this is going to be in a 2022 problem. And in some cases, they're predicting its impact to go into 2023. So medical supply companies and other companies that supply into the healthcare ecosystem need to adapt. So let's think about how do we start to form an idea or an opinion about how to do that, right? We obviously have our day-to-day activities, but what else can we do? What things might not we have sort of uncovered yet? So I think one of the things that's interesting to me is that really throughout the pandemic, providers really demanded more from their supplier and distributor partners and their manufacturing partners, for that matter. And those requests really often included calls for more transparency into supply chain operations, warehousing, logistics, et cetera. Which in a lot of cases, in other cases, they were willing to do, right? We were all there, right? We were all doing everything that we could to get the necessary supplies to where they need to be in a timely fashion to support patients. Because at the end of the day, that's what this industry is about, right? Supporting patients. But often, though, the same suppliers and distributors and manufacturers that I just mentioned, they weren't able to get the same level of data as an alternate, and a sort of a 180-degree view there. And it's not because the providers didn't want to provide it. So in many cases, they couldn't, right? You had COVID cases rising, elective surgeries getting pushed out. What does that do to their own forecasting demand planning? Throws it askew. Again, they were short-staffed, and the heroes that were on the front lines, their focus was obviously on patient care and patient quality, right? But they're dealing with long hours, incredibly tremendous stress from the COVID protocols, mask mandates, all that. So they don't have the necessary time to sort of build out what was needed. And then finally, when we were able to take a breath, say mid-pandemic, well, we said, what can we do here? How can we get a forecast in place to see what we think might be happening in the next 6, 12, 18 months? Assuredly, there is value in those industry prognostications, absolutely. But I will suggest that the value of those particular industry insights diminishes greatly as time goes by from the publication date. Right? It's one thing to say in a particular month that this is how we project things are going to go out. But if 2 months later there's a COVID outbreak in one part of the world or in a particular part of the country, those things aren't accounted for, in those industry trade publications. So there's just more that needs to be done there, and it's got to be more that's necessary. And I think what's necessary is that the manufacturers and distributors and suppliers, like most of the folks on this call, they need a clear and timely data as to what's happening down at the customer level to truly understand how they can take that information, turn it around, and guide their sales and forecasting process. And I think that's where you're going to see that definitive healthcare can really provide some amazing insights. So I'm going to bring Katie Sakovitz in now, and she's going to take you through a handful of examples about how we believe our data can help you in those particular decision-making processes. Okay?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kevin. So everybody, let's go ahead and dive in and look at some of the value of the product here. So Definitive Healthcare's commercial medical claim insight data set holds both our inpatient and outpatient diagnoses and procedure claims across the continuum of care. The tool allows our clients to get a view into therapy areas of interest, competitive markets, as well as trends over time. This data is sourced specifically from the largest clearinghouses in the United States and is updated monthly. The claims will be updated by the 15th of each month and show information from the close of the previous month. So for instance, we will have claims from September in the product by the 15th of October. All right, so let's now go ahead and dive into the product. We are going to pretend that I am looking to understand a provider market for a wound care specific product here. First off, I want to ensure that I'm pinpointing the right code for the product at hand. What we can do here is use our description box and a keyword of our choosing to see what our options are. This helps determine which code best aligns with your products and also helps you see where the highest volumes are. All right. Once I've pinpointed the code that makes the most sense for my product, in this example, just so we know, I'm using a few foam dressing specific procedures. I can actually pinpoint markets where these procedures are being done the most. Here, I've changed my view to state and added in a begins with code to cover a few different CPTs for foam dressings. Once I run my search, I can see here that Texas, California, and Arizona are my 3 top markets. Great. Finally, I can change that view by we see right at the top one last time to provider and code and update my geography to look at Texas, California, and Arizona, which I know are my 3 top markets, to give me a targeted prospect list of facilities that are billing for the highest volumes of these foam dressing procedures I was just looking at. This list will give me the provider, the code, location, number of procedures, number of unique patients, total charges, and average charge per procedure.
Okay, this is a particularly interesting point. I just want to stop and say, I think a lot of us in our work, depending on the type of organization that you are, right? If you're a pure play manufacturing organization, you likely are getting your sales data either from your distributor, or in some cases, you might be pulling it from a third-party data aggregation company. And so, in a lot of those cases, that's great information, right? You're getting the what? You're getting the units and the dollars associated with those particular products. You're seeing competitive information. You're seeing that trend over a number of years, which is great. But ultimately, in my mind, that is the what. That does not get into the why. So what we're showing you here is and like Katie just went through, we're showing you the procedures and diagnoses around why and how your products are being used and the trends against those and where they are, how many, the number of unique patients, etc. So if you're then able to pair up, and again, I'll go back to what Katie said a couple minutes ago. This data is updated on a monthly basis by the 15th of the following month. Now, I know in many cases, the distribution data that we've seen over the course of the last number of years, especially in the medical supply space, that data is often anywhere from at least a month, but oftentimes 2, 3, or even 4 months in arrears. So it doesn't have as much predictive value as you would hope that it would. But now we're going to be able to show you that within 2 weeks of the end of a month, we're going to show you exactly what happened in the previous month, right? So talking about the predictive value of that, being able to make a decision on something that happened so very recently so that you can actually still impact the long-term supply chains, right? So I think about, again, the comment I made earlier, if you went from supply chain lead time of 6 to 12 months, depending on where you're sourcing your products from, that lead time is probably now potentially 4, 5, or even 6 months. How do you account for that in a scenario where you're not getting data, or the only data you're getting is from almost 3 months ago? Now we're going to show you, here are the procedures aligned with very specifically what your products do and how they're used. And then you're able to then utilize that to predict out the trends that you're seeing in the most recent 3 months much faster and much more accurately.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Kevin. Yeah, and I think that it's funny, the next slide will actually show us how time period can be even more effective by showing our actual claim year functionality. So, month over month is exactly what we can do in the product. But we also have this widget here that will show us 2016 to our current day, which is August 2021, again, September in a few weeks, that helps us understand markets or providers that are trending up or down for the given procedures of interest. So, specifically here, we're looking for foam dressings, but, depending on what therapy area or specific code you're looking at, you can take a peek at that year over year within the product. All right. And just a PS for you. You can also use this same functionality for analyzing COVID-19 movement in the market. So whether you are selling PPE equipment or not, this is going to give you insight into areas that have the highest volumes, or on the flip side, areas you might want to stay away from, depending on your product suite. This data can also be trended over time. So we can really see where cases are improving, rising. You saw in some of the graphs that Kevin provided earlier, a nice view of that. But again, using it on the actual code level for COVID-19.
What's interesting here is that not only with COVID-related claims, but also with any of these other claims, it allows your marketing team and your sales team to have a truly empathetic conversation with the customer, because you're going to know at a facility level what they're working on, what they're dealing with, what types of patients they're seeing, right? To be able to go in and have a very, not only a high-level C-suite conversation, but also a very clinical conversation with the nursing leadership. That to me, allows you to do some very magic things from a sales perspective, because ultimately you're trying to force those connections, right? You're showing that you ultimately know and care about the customer's business, which obviously we all do, but this allows you to do it in a way that seemingly is much more meaningful.
Absolutely. Awesome. So now I want to highlight some other areas of our product that can really help us stay in the know in this ever-changing time. Is kind of the theme of today. The first is going to be our hierarchy analysis or affiliation options. So right at the top here, you'll see a screenshot of our daily merger and acquisition updates and affiliation changes to keep up with the ever-changing healthcare ecosystem. Bottom of the page here, you also are seeing our full view into a healthcare system and all of the firm types that roll up to that system. So for example, if you're already working with a few hospitals within a network or a system, might as well check out the other relevant facility types under that network to see if they're worthwhile to reach out to, and you can do that within that section here. All right, lastly is going to be GPO Insights. So we will list out the facility's affiliated group purchasing organizations, as well as who they are primarily working with based on claims count. There is also a GPO search function in our product that you can see on the right-hand side here that gives you insight into their member rosters and their own executive contacts. This data is also going to be updated daily in the product.
One of the things I'll call out here is that not only is it in the product, but we also have data integration with your relevant CRM, right? So if you're a Salesforce customer or another CRM customer, this can be piped in directly into your system so that you can see these things as well.
Yeah, great point. All right. So now that we've gone over what you can do in the product, what else can we do for you? We have a great team of that we call professional services of data analysts that can take the insights we just created to the next level. So I have a few examples here, just a few, not all, of what we can do with the list that we just created. So number one, we can add executive contacts with direct phones, emails into that provider list. There's a ton of different titles that we can add in, but an example is nursing contacts, as well as what we call physician leaders, who are physicians that hold an executive position at a facility and typically potentially have buying power. Number 2 are matching affiliated physicians or clinicians of a given specialty to these healthcare organizations. It's going to add another layer of understanding of potentially another avenue into that facility. Finally, analyzing claims analytics over time. We saw the option in the product, but there's a ton that we can do on the back end as well. Noting an example would be looking at 2019 to present day for foam wound dressings to see prior to and post-pandemic volumes and numbers. One last note here is we also can add that all of these types of reports to what's called an SFTP site that will actually update the data at a cadence of your choosing. So you don't have to come back to us and ask for the same report over and over again. They will go ahead and update that data for you as our product updates as well. So with that, that is actually going to wrap up the database portion of the webinar. And I know we have a few minutes here, so definitely want to dive into some final Q&A.
Absolutely.
Awesome. All right, let's see if we have any in the chat here. Let's see. So one that actually came in a minute ago was also, can we track patient journey information? So I'll give a quick response here. Yes, we absolutely can. So with the claims data that we receive from the clearinghouses, they do pull together and clean up and give the claims to us with a patient identifier that we're able to use to track those patients throughout the journey through the continuum. So whether that's going to be referral data, whether that's going to be looking at just general movement throughout a certain market or within a system, we're able to track that through our professional services team on the back end. So great question. All right, one other one we got is what other data is relevant to medical supply companies in definitive healthcare? So great question. You know, claims, hierarchy, affiliations, GPOs, all huge and helpful. But there's definitely some other areas of the product that can be helpful for you and just really staying up with the market. One big one that comes to mind is requests for proposals, as well as certificates of need. So requests for proposals is, of course, requests coming from these facilities themselves. We track public government requests from their websites. So we have them updated daily in the product. You can set up alerts and get them sent to you so that you're the first to know if they're looking for a certain type of supply. Second is going to be certificates of need. So understanding new facilities that are popping up, large renovations that are going on. This will really help you, again, insight into a market to see, okay, new facility popping up, I'm going to be the first person to jump in their door. Large renovation, same thing. It could mark a change in leadership, or there could just be changes going on in the org in general. Let me go ahead and reach out.
Thank you so much for joining. Katie, thank you. And look forward to seeing everybody soon. Hope you have a great week.
Thanks, everybody.